Hello, and welcome to the Linguistics 412 Science Minute with me, your host, Max Freeland. Today, I want to talk about something that we talked about way early on in class, and that is errors in speech production. At the beginning of the semester in September, we talked about the various types of speech production errors, including semantic relation errors, incorrect word errors, and phonemic exchange errors, as well as others. But there's one particular example that I wanted to focus on, and that was captured in the lecture capture from the week that we talked about these errors. And that is the word epitome. Now, Fatima brought this up in class, and Fatima made it clear to us when she told us that her friend knew this word, but accidentally pronounced it epitome, which is what it looks like when it's written out on the page, but those of us who have encountered this word before know that this is pronounced epitome. Her friend had already encountered this word and knew how it was pronounced, but she still made that same speech error by pronouncing this incorrectly as epitome. So that makes us ask, why? We as linguists know to listen for these things, and we know that as listeners, we need to be cooperative and understanding of the people who we're listening to. So when we hear someone mispronounce a word like epitome, we understand what their message is and what they're trying to convey, even though we recognize that as wrong. So we know that these people are making an error, but can a listener make an error too? A study by Milberg and al. States that recent research in lexical memory with normal subjects has shown two distinct aspects to word processing. One involves the automatic activation of semantic information in memory, and the other involves conscious access to semantic information in the retrieval of specific lexical entry. The question here is whether or not both of those systems are working all the time in normal patients, or if we can turn those things off in order to better suit our situations. The main study that I'd like to focus on is one called Jones et al., which was published in 2019. This study looked at Philadelphia court stenographers and tested them on their ability to transcribe and understand African American vernacular English. Those transcribers, those stenographers, were supposedly 95% accurate when it came to transcribing court proceedings. Jones et al. Were inspired by the murder trial of George Zimmerman, who killed Trayvon Martin. One of the key witnesses in that case was consistently badgered through her testimony and asked to repeat herself simply because of the way she spoke. While she was very clear in her answers and could be understood by most of the people watching, the defense would consistently ask her to repeat herself to the point where she would become annoyed and would sound aggressive. Or so the defense claimed. We can imagine why a 19-year-old on the stand testifying on the murder of one of her friends might sound frustrated at being asked to repeat herself while the man who killed her friend sat directly in front of her. George Zimmerman was ultimately acquitted, and after finding that there were multiple misinterpretations in the court documentation of the key witness's testimony, Jones et al. Began their experiment. The pilot consisted of all African American vernacular English speakers, and they were asked to transcribe speech recorded that was also spoken in African American vernacular English. These speakers were able to transcribe and paraphrase with 100% accuracy the messages that they heard through the recordings. There was then a second pilot experiment where lawyers were given the recordings and asked to transcribe what they thought they heard. Now, while the lawyers weren't all African American vernacular English speakers, they did pretty well, averaging around 80 to 90% accuracy. Now, this brings us to our actual experiment, where the stenographers were asked to transcribe the recorded speech. This is where things get scary. The people who are supposedly trained to do this as a job and do it effectively and efficiently had a 50% accuracy averaged among all of them, with the lowest score being 18%. It's worth noting here that even the stenographers who identified as African American and had experience with African American vernacular English performed about the same as their peers, hovering around that 50% mark. So we really have to ask, why did this happen? That brings us back to Milberg et al., where we have the two distinct forms of semantic word processing. One, automatic activation of semantic meaning, and two, conscious access of semantic meaning from a lexicon. Since the stenographers are trying to write fast and are trying to keep up with the speakers as they are speaking, they're actively flouting one of these two aspects. even though the stenographers were given time to revise what they had written, most of them chose not to, and they only relied on the automatic activation of the semantic concepts in their brain. They didn't go back and consciously think about what they had written. This led to lots of misinterpretations of the recordings that they had written. So why did I bring up Fatima's friend's pronunciation of the word epitome? It's because when we are doing things at runtime, sometimes we lose some of those aspects of semantic processing along the way. And that can have huge implications when we're working with the court system. When juries are making deciding factors on whether or not a stenographer made the distinction between did and didn't, that can mean someone's life in prison versus their freedom. So linguists have work to do. Understanding the levels of representation in our brain of semantic processing, and when some of those steps in semantic processing are skipped, is the first step to cooperative communication when it matters the most.